Well, crap. It didn't paint itself. I guess that means I gotta do it. To get materials. And the materials I chose to paint this guy are nothing crazy. This is nothing more than an exterior rated house brand paint from the local hardware store. Now the exterior rated is the important part here. Obviously, the shed's outside. But exterior rated paint relies on multiple coats for protection. So a couple of coats of this will go a long way for protection. Now keep in mind you will have to maintain this depending on your climate every 5 to 7 to possibly even 10 years. But for the price of paint and great protection, it's a worthwhile trade-off. Now I'm applying it with a really poofy roller, a really fluffy guy. Like it was like 20 or 25 mil thick nap. It was really big, and that's because the smart siding has quite a bit of texture to it. Unfortunately, it still wasn't big enough to get in the really deep grooves, so I just turned the roller on its side and kind of wedged it back and forth, and then back rolled everything to smooth it out. I did the same thing with all my exposed screw heads too. Now, the color I chose was just a little bit of gray inside of a white base, so it's just slightly grayish white. I think it turned out really, really nice. I also set my door panels up on some sawhorses that we cut out in the last video, and that's because it's going to be a lot easier to pre-paint my door panels now than it will be later once the door's assembled. Now all total, I think it only took me about 45 minutes to do an entire coat on the shed, so it went pretty quick. Now on the very bottom you may have noticed I had some tuck tape. That's mostly because I have a ton of tuck tape sitting around, and I didn't really need it to be like painter's tape, crisp lines. I just needed it to stop the roller from coming off the sheet and going splat into the frame, and this served its job just fine. Now jumping forward a little bit, our gable fascia and our front fascia trim is on. You may have seen this if you watched the last video. So now we have to add the trim below that, our horizontal trim that's going to cover up the seam between our sheets. And I'm using a very simple angle finder jig here. Now I'm just holding it in line with the seam between the sheets and pushing the other part up into the bottom of the gable. And that gives me the exact angle that I need to cut my wood at. Now because the ends aren't perfectly flush to a point, I also had to measure that little straight end that I had there, and then I can transfer all of my measurements over to a 2x6x10 that I'm going to cut this out of. With one side down, I can cut out the other. I am not going to rely on the measurements that I took from the first side, however. I have a pretty calibrated eyeball, but it's not that calibrated. So because my gables were kind of cut independently and freehanded into place, I don't trust them to be identical. I don't know if I need to get a new calibration on my eyeballs. I wonder how much that would cost. Anyway, so I'm definitely going to take new measurements from the second side. But I need to know how long to actually cut the board first because all my measurements are going to be pulled from there, so I grabbed an entire width measurement. Then I transferred all my marks over. I realize here that I'm standing on the wrong side and I'm holding the cut end of the board, which isn't technically correct, but I didn't want to move the camera, and I also didn't want to stand in front of the shot. Now, because I'm freehanding these cuts with the circular saw, they may not be exactly perfect. So once I had the board kind of held up into place temporarily with some clamps, I took the old calibrated eyeball for a spin and gave her a look. Ooh, I think that was a good sound. Uh-oh, he looks worried about this one. Oh no, he's got the pencil. Well, we're definitely going to have to trim something down here. There you go. See, didn't take quite enough off of this corner. So don't be afraid to take it back off and kind of sneak up on these cuts just until they get fitting just nice and tight. See? Much better. Now, with that board done, I asked you guys if I should add a vertical piece kind of right from that horizontal board up to the center peak of the gable, and it was an overwhelming yes that you voted for, so we're going to do that. Now, I'm just taking the leftover piece of 2x6x10 that we had from cutting that last board out, and I'm using the cutoff from the gable ends to actually figure out the angles, and just found center on the board and marked it from there. It's actually pretty easy. Truth be told, I did cut this one a little bit short, but it wasn't so short that I couldn't use it. I figured if I just pulled the center up, I could close that gap, and I was fine with that. You're never going to see it from the ground. So I took everything off and threw some finish at it and painted it all. And because I don't want to wait for the paint to dry, let's jump ahead to the paint being dry, shall we? It's a video after all. Yay! Now, because I knew I was going to pull the center piece up, I just added a center pipe clamp, slid my vertical piece in, tightened the pipe clamp, and it closed the gap. Then we could fasten oh my god, there's two of them. Whew, okay, there's only one. Now don't worry about what you're screwing into. We have our vertical saddle here holding up our beam, as well as our top plates for the walls, so there's wood everywhere. For our corners, I'm just going to take a page out of the last shed and use the exact same trim style that I did there because, well, it just works. Now I have these boards right here. These are 5/4 by 6" deck boards. That just means they're a true 1" thick. But a lot of people in the last series expressed that they can't get 5/4 by 6 deck boards in their area, and that's okay. I mean, we use 2x6 trim on the rest of the shed, so you can definitely use 2x6 here. I'm just using this because it's a little bit less money, but either way works. Now you can rip these down however you please, but if you want to try it with a circular saw like I am here, and you've never done this before, if you notice on the front of your circular saw fence, there's a 0 mark. I know you guys are looking at it upside down, but that 0 mark is right in line with your saw blade. Now I want my trim piece here to be 2 1/4 inches wide, so I'm going to find the 2 1/4 inch mark, and I'm actually going to use that along the very edge of my board, and as I'm coming through, the 0 mark here is exactly where my saw blade is going to be. So as long as this stays along the outside edge, your rip is going to be fine. And one thing before I rip this down, it doesn't matter if you're using these 5/4 boards or 2x6, all these measurements are going to be in the plans, so don't worry about it too much. Now, the beauty about this is that we can take this thick board and the thin board, rest this one on top, and now they are the same thickness this direction as they are this direction. So after applying some construction adhesive to the joint, just to make sure that the joints stay nice and tight over time, it looks good, it doesn't open up, and it doesn't allow water to penetrate in, I had added a screw every foot or so, making sure that they were flush along the bottom so I had nice tight L shapes. Then I set those aside and ripped a couple of more boards straight in half at 2 3/4 inches. Now these are what's going to make up the trim for around the door, on the door frame itself, and so on and so forth. Once I had that all done, I could throw some color at these guys. Well, technically black is more of a shade. I guess it's also technically all of the colors. So I guess I painted everything with all of the colors. That sounds right. Now all credit for this idea goes to my brother. He looked at this and said, "Are you doing anything on the bottom, trim or anything?" And I said, "No." And he looks at it, he says, "You should paint it the same color as your trim along the frame." It was a good idea. I hadn't actually thought about that myself, so this is my brother's idea. Alright, now one little touch you can do, it's not mandatory, but it's a nice little thing. I've got the seam for where my boards are joined up on the 8-foot side of all of my corners. Doesn't really matter which way you put it. I'm just putting it on the 8-foot side because my door is on the 10. So coming in and out, you're less likely to see the seam, even though these are black and the seam's pretty well hidden. It's an option. Now when I'm putting my screws in, remember there's studs in every corner, so you're going to hit wood. You don't have to worry about where you put it, but I'm using 2-inch treated screws here because I'm going through 1-inch material and it's pressure treated, but I'm putting my screws to attach to the shed in line with the screw that I used to make the actual trim piece, just so it's got a uniform look. Now it's starting to look like something. Now for the door trim, I'm putting my rounded side towards the inside and my square edge that I cut towards the outside. Again, you can do what you like. This is just what I like. For the trim above the door, I left an inch overhang on each side, and this is just going to account for wood movement. If the side trim pieces decide to shrink and expand over time, this is just going to ensure that they're never going to come up short, and to the eyeball, it's always going to look good.
And now we need to build a door, because I can't close and lock things in here without one. And I'm going to kind of cop out. I'm going to build the door very similar to the way I did last time, mostly because it just worked. It's good and solid. But a couple minor differences. So we need to start out by taking an overall height measurement and subtracting ½ an inch off of that. And that'll give us our reveal of a ¼ inch top and bottom. And now, using those two cutoff pieces to act as my vertical stiles for the door, I can measure the remaining opening, and that'll give me the length of my rail as well as my reveals on both sides, if I subtract ½ an inch.
After measuring and cutting all our door frame pieces to length, we obviously had to assemble the frame. Now, I decided pocket holes are probably going to be the easiest method for this. It's quick, it's easy, and the screws going from one board to the other prevent the boards from flexing against each other and creating a wobbly door. So after adding a little bit of construction adhesive to the joint, for some more strength, we could go ahead and actually screw the entire thing together. Now, this made a very strong door, which is good because this is actually a very big door and it's a very heavy door. Now, I did need one more board kind of in 1/3 of the door here, just because our door sheeting is two separate pieces. I needed that seam to land on something. So after just sort of roughly marking out where I needed the board to be, I slid it over and pocket hole screwed it into place as well, but I didn't add glue to this one because it's not really structural, it's just holding the seam.
And with the frame built, we can start lining up our sheets. Now remember, there will be a little bit of overhang here all the way around because we cut these flush with our door frame, and our door itself is a ¼ inch smaller, or ½ inch smaller. So we need to line everything up with a little bit of overhang. We'll trim that up after. Pretty good there. I'm just going to slide this guy off ever so slightly. Apply my glue to the seam like every other time. And now I can fasten everything together.
Once all the sheeting was screwed onto the frame, we could trim off the excess. Now, there's not a lot here, and there's a few different ways you could do this. I just snapped a straight line with my chalk line and ran my circular saw all around the outside edge. This doesn't have to be 100% perfect. We've got a decent sized reveal for the door opening, and it's just a shed. So don't be too worried about being exact. Speaking of exact, in order to cut out the door trim, I ended up just setting it in place, flushing it up, and using the door itself to reference my lengths. That way I had, well, an exact length. So I guess be exact with some things and not with others. I don't know. So I put the square outside edge that I cut on the outside, and I put the rounded edges inside. I just figured this gave it a nice look, and it squared up the outside edge of the door nicely. Now, once everything was painted, you can see that a couple of the boards kind of twisted and warped on me, so I just pulled and pushed it into place so the edge was flush with the door as I went up. Now, once I got to the very end, it was a little too tough for even my manly hands, so I had to enlist the help of a pipe clamp. Then I could finish fastening the top trim, the bottom trim, the middle trim, and these two decorative pieces. I don't know if they're really necessary. I had nothing to screw them to, so I just kind of centered them up and glued them into place with some more construction adhesive, but a little design never hurt.
Now, through the magic of time passing, crazy how that works, it's the next day. And I couldn't stand it anymore. I was staring at the door last night. I came back and painted the entire outside edge with the same black from the trim. I think it looks a lot better this way. And also, now the edges are all protected. Now we have to mount our hinges. So, easy way to get equal hinge spacing is figure out where you want your hinges first. Now I've got this guy here. I'm going to put him 8 inches. This will work for any size hinge and any size spacing. So I'm going to put my other one at the same 8 inches. Now I'm going to measure in between my two hinges. And I've got 55.5. So then we're going to take these two hinges, add them together, the 4-inch hinges, so that's 8. Take 8 off of 55.5. Divide that number by 3 because we're going to have 2 hinges. So we're going to have 3 spaces, and that'll give you your equal spacing measurement. For me, it's about 15.8 inches. There we go. Now, I've also got a black latch, a black handle, and black 2.5-inch screws to mount everything.
The reason I went with such long screws here is because I wanted it to go down through the trim, the sheet, and then into the frame below, just increasing strength that much more. I only added 3 screws though, and I drilled out one of the holes, and I'll show you why in a second, but now we can mount the door. So once I had some 1/4-inch plywood spacers set on the ground, that gave us our reveal top and bottom. We could set the door in place, just hold on to it because it could very easily just fall into the shed at this point, which would suck. So after we shimmied it left and right, I finished screwing it to the door frame itself, again only adding 3 screws and drilling that last one out. Now the ones that I drilled out were the ones that were kind of in the center of the trim, right in the meaty part of the frames, just for some more strength.
All right, now one question that kept rising to the top and coming up fairly often on the previous shed video was about security in the door. Now a lot of people were concerned that just having screws in the hinges would allow somebody to just come by, unscrew this side of the door and get into the shed, which is a fair point. I'm sure a lot of us have had instances where some dickhead out there thinks that your stuff is more valuable to him and proceeds to try and help themselves to it. So I don't remember who this was. I apologize for you. I would give you credit if I could, but somebody had commented that they had actually built the previous shed and they ended up using a couple of through bolts per hinge. So drilling out a bigger hole, I've got a couple of carriage bolts that I spray painted black, and I've got 4 inches for the door and 6 inches to go through the frame with a washer, a lock washer, and a nut on the back side. Once that's tightened down, unless you have access to the inside of the shed, you're not getting through those. So it's a good idea.
Now because carriage bolts have that square neck right underneath the head that's bigger than the actual shank of the bolt, I had to take a drill bit that was big enough to fit that neck, but only drill in about 1/4 of an inch deep. That way it would fit it, and then I could actually slide the bolt into place. I definitely should have grabbed a mallet because this hurt the hand. Then we could add our fasteners inside. So the washer, the lock washer, which will keep everything tight, as well as our nut. And I tightened everything down until I had some pretty good compression into the wood. Now one of the final things to do with the door is to add a door stop. So with my dad holding the door on the outside and the trim is all flush with itself, I went inside with some scrap pieces of OSB that I'd ripped down to about 1 inch wide, and I screwed them to the door frame. Now this is going to prevent the door from over closing, as well as having the added benefit of kind of weather sealing the door and preventing driving rain and driving snow from finding its way in over time, which I hear is a good thing.
There we go. Oh, hi. Sorry I can't do anything crazy, come sliding in and out of somewhere and be a jokester like that. Obviously some time has passed since we finished the shed. The shed is finished. It's been about a month. Had my ankle surgery since then, and I've been getting along great with the shed. I've already kind of built some shelving inside. You may have seen that in the background of the last shot, but either way, it's finished, and I hope you guys like it. We did a few different things compared to the last shed. Got a different foundation. We've got our smart siding, which I think looks fantastic with the white and black. And obviously the gable roof was the big one. So hope you guys learned a whole bunch of tips and tricks along the way. If you guys want to build this, depending on when you watch this, there may or may not be plans available yet for this. There's definitely plans for the last shed yet. All that's going to be linked down below. Maybe you don't want to build a shed. Maybe you just want to build some patio furniture. or some house furniture. Doesn't matter. All the plans are linked down below. Then you can build something fantastic for yourself and support my channel, which would be amazing. If you want a free way to support the channel, just a thumbs up as well as a comment down below would be amazing. And let me know what you liked, what you didn't, and that'd be cool too. So thanks very much for watching, you guys, and I'll see you later.